So good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming here to V2. This is the first time we've done such an exciting presentation. It's a sort of what I call a public defence. Defence not always the name that some people prefer to use. However, that is actually what it is. So I'm very happy and delighted that Stefan Gallen could join us, along with Sylvia LaRusso as well, who are the external assessors for this year's graduation. They have read all the theses and the other materials that were sent and have prepared the examination today.
There's almost half people, when they feel ignored, they barely bring it up in person. So they barely talking about their negative feeling. So as a designer, my goal is visualize this kind of three components in their relationship, also share with their partner.
And so I would be curious if you were wondering yourself if there is different expectation by different genders, by different age, and if this can come back in the app somehow.
The very difficult part of the app is people has really different expectation. Also depends on what kind of relationship they have and how care they chat with each other.
Yeah.
How can we define the relationship between ourselves and the digital half? Public Turing tests to tell computer and human apart as an agent between human and bots. The line of defense, when you transform from yourself into digital self, on one hand, it protects the sign-up page. On the other hand, the test triggers me to think about what it means to be human.
What's your definition of the self, and what did you use in order to define this notion for yourself?
I think nowadays the self and the digital self is inseparable. As I said, if you use a unit of the time as a measurement, that if you spend half your life online, then which is your digital self, then they are inseparable.
My first design question was how would images exist in VR and how would text and icons behave as 3D objects? I started with a fictive homepage of a website and explored how it would look converted to 3D from 2D interface. I also designed the user interface elements to be able to be moved around by the user to further interact with.
Why VR, AR web design? Isn't that a bit like designing pamphlets for the web? Now that you have an entirely new model and all these interactions, why are you framing it within the previous paradigm?
I'm not framing it as web design. I would like to not use that expression.
Okay.
But I'm actually opening new possibilities for web design in this new medium by avoiding interfaces that are inspired from 2D mediums.
The social reality and the virtual reality already become very blurred into each other through the compensation, the illusionary, the identity, the reflection, and the relation between our personal perception of ourselves and others. So I want to apply this the technology as a kind of like self-mirroring in my project to talk about my social anxiety.
Do I become a robot, or if I am still a human?
What's the role of facial and emotional detection algorithm? In which way this tool says something about social anxiety?
Yeah, actually, after this experiment, I concluded that, of course, all this technology cannot really understand our human being and our inner desire or struggle. So that's the reason why I choosing this way to, instead of solving or saying that's good or bad, I'm keep it open to my audience.
Nowadays, I think there are some people like me, they don't like to read as a habit anymore. So I think as a graphic designer, I'm interested in book design and the reading experience.
I would say that the prototype and the experiments are valuable, but maybe framing that differently can bring more value to the project.
I think that you really, in your case, that you really need to engage with the content of the book itself, because otherwise you run the risk, an ethical risk, to change what was meant in that book. Because when you displace things, language is already a structure which has its own flow and it's complicated. it. So then when you kind of take pieces apart and work with them differently, you have to be aware of what it is that you're doing.
The research that I've been doing is focusing on my personal interest and my personal project. I started wondering about self-publishing, what could be the strategies for myself. I decided to spread the messages on the banknotes itself as a way, as a medium, but also as a great way to vehicle messages, since they are euro and we are in a European Union. In that sense, they have a huge chance of distribution.
A bit of the risk that I see within the whole projects and the thesis is like to fetishize self-publishing in itself, as if it was by itself something that is autonomous, independent, and political.
My projects became a workshop in which I wanted to ask the participants to experiment with typography, with material, and with the generation of and the creation of meaning through the medium of a protest sign.
Why not a business card then, or any other medium that has some limitation and where you play with typography?
Because another element that came from the beginning was always questioning or put the medium in a completely new light, in a different light, something else. That's why I also don't want to have political implications in the protest sign.
Where do you see a position forming as an outcome of this workshop?
The refusal was just at the beginning because I didn't want them to recognize me because of my social involvement, the medium that I'm using, or a specific aesthetics that I developed.
Be aware of like what that means to bring like that kind of culture, the kind of struggle, the people beaten up in the street, in a workshop totally deprived of political issue.
I was about to give up until I saw a science article about saving plants using electricity shocks. So this was finally the moment I could contribute to this project. I was in charge of the prototypes, the program design, the identity design, and the website, also the 3D modeling for the case design.
Analyzing.
That's the most
Do
important
not touch
part
plant.
of this treatment.
26-volt. Shock advised. Press shock button. Release after 3 clicks.
Great.
Erected in 1981 in honor of the 40th anniversary of the People's Liberation War, the end of which was marked by the end of World War II, the victory over fascism, and ultimately gained Macedonia its first nationhood. It was my father, Grigor Čemerski, who is one of the 2 authors of the monument. I continued to work on my own studio work as well. I made a sort of documentary video, which is like an analytical video, where we talk about the relationship of the state towards the artist, the meaning of the treatment of public space, and the sense of the loss of the collective.
And your thesis was extremely well researched. I enjoyed reading it very much. I would not expect necessarily within a research-based practice like this that this work would manifest itself within painting. I mean, how are you placing yourself?
You know, I have, again, I've spoken about this with all my tutors. I have a bit of a trouble generalizing things after this, because I'm still very much in it.
Don't be ashamed to say, no, this is okay. You're responsible for it. You've done the research, and I think you can be very confident about owning that space.
For going deeper, I contacted my psychoanalyst friend who is living in Italy. I felt surprised about her interpretations of my dreams. She revealed a lot of products of my inner world that I ignored or never noticed. She pointed out my confusion about gender identity, which caused by the lacking of the cultivation of femininity during my growth.
If you say that surrealism has no interest to you, so their work with trying to touch the forces of the unconsciousness, that's not important, then in what way is psychoanalysis important to your work?
Well, it's really about kind of art therapy. I use like a psychoanalyst to help myself. This is my starting point.
In terms of your terminology, your choice of terminology in your writing, you have to be extremely careful of using these general terms and maybe with ideas that aren't fully researched when you're writing them down. It's just one thing.
Maybe mildly offensive question, how can I unbelieve in dinosaurs? And this is a man who has dedicated his whole life to fossils and to the study of dinosaurs. So his immediate reply was, well, you would have to be very, very religious in order to deny all of this evidence, which didn't really sit well with me, because I still consider myself to be religious, and this implied that means that I close my eyes towards evidence. I have the tendency to pick facts that go with my worldview and that I don't consider other facts.
To inscribe dinosaurs into the American landscape, as a European, choosing to do that might be considered to be a political metaphor.
I hadn't thought of it in that way.
It turns out that there is no word for the opposite of loneliness, not in Dutch nor in English.
Where your work touches me is when I see a family tree with red dots for everybody that's been affected by a certain condition, is the word, yes. Then there's something that touches me deeply as and out of this sense of anxiety, and it's almost like the more you try to rationalize these feelings of loneliness and this conditions and this stuff, the more that feeling is communicated to me, and I get this very anxious, difficult feeling when I see that you said you couldn't recreate the wall in your studio. Shame. I think that it's something you should think of, because that communicates to me these feelings of shit. How do I get on with the world? How do I deal with the world? How do I deal with people? I'm trying to rationalize it. I'm trying to photograph it, and all of these things are part of a very rich language and vocabulary. I would encourage you to follow those slightly rational ways of dealing with your irrationality, the anxiety.
It has been extensively discussed in image theory that the realm of imagery has been colonized by the graphic image, namely photographs, paintings, sculptures, etc. In short, the literal image. So in my practice, by taking away the sense of sight, I explore those different other dimensions of the domain of imagery, of the visual. If I'm working with this is photography. You know?
Yeah.
Like this optical thing is basically photography.
Theatricalizing the moment of image, the image being made as a kind of continuous present.
Yeah.
And why is that more interesting than the object to you?
Completely you block the sense of sight, and through words you explain what the person is supposed to see. So you do rely on the ability to imagine something that can be seen, in a sense.
I don't think it's about physical blindness. I think it's about cultural visibility.
Yeah, so I want to just add to that. A few weeks ago we had an internationalization day with all of the management team, and it was interesting there how some reasons for internationalizing the student populace was so that they may learn. And I had to stick my hand up and say, I absolutely disagree. It's so that we may learn the stories of persons from elsewhere that can then really enrich our knowledge and not always sort of create this sort of dominance and imposition of a knowledge that is one type of knowledge, but to really bring in all others as well.
Absolutely, and that dominance thing, is like is pretty much the worst thing you can do in an art school, I would say.
These mistakes that I made and that occurred in this process, and I suddenly realized that they are really representing all the hidden connections I was searching for. It's not longer about me. It is really about universality, which we all commonly share.
Or you make the connection between the self and the face.
Yeah.
Why haven't you considered the whole body as being part of the self?
My mind.
Because I know some other parts of your work. You have got the body, because in your studio there is a fur jacket.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
And you're pulling parts out onto the floor which you've not shown. So even I see in the textile that you've collectively woven together, it's some sort of bodily connectivity.
Indeed, there is somebody.
I did 8 drawings by closing my eyes and never looked at them besides just one. If you look at the walls around you carefully, you will notice the many gray traces and the bruises we leave on them. We are mostly using and perceiving them self-centrically, but the walls or the other subjects consist of our traces. My intention was to measure what I saw. Later, I started to measure what I don't see, but can be seen in certain conditions. In the end, I'm measuring empty spaces given shape by the gravity or resistance as a potential.
How to act ethically when making photo work about and with people. 1. I must be interested in the topic. 2. I must be aware of who I am and what my position is regarding the participants. I had serious doubts about whether I still wanted to photograph. Since I started photographing in 2008, my focus has been on individuals or certain groups that are stigmatized.
But imagine you were asked to photograph Geert Wilders. Can you imagine how you would approach that ethically?
You position your role as a photographer as one of privilege. You presume that privilege, but there are other people more privileged than you. So what if there's a reversal? That's what I'm trying to get to.
With this reacting method, I listen to a particular music with headphones, and using both my hands, I react to what I hear on paper. It was again about concentration, slowing down, and a dialogue.
Even when you're making some artworks from musics, you're always in touch with the moment, or even when you're just watching the tree, it's all about that time. So I would love to hear about it.
Maybe it's again that conflict, like I can say concentration or trying to concentrate.
You go through this process of repetition of the drawing, and then you know when to stop when your mind goes blank. It seems to me, judging from your thesis, that point at which your mind goes blank is the whole reason behind making this work. So actually, I could make a case that the mind going blank is the work in its essence, possibly, in its total abstraction. I don't know. Maybe it's taking it too far, but it just seemed to me quite an elegant answer to the idea of process, but process perhaps just the route you take.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.